Hello and welcome to Throwback Thursday. For this episode, we take you back to the first recorded Reflections episode in 1992, where guest Bill Hicks talks about bringing the Meridian Mall to Meridian Township.
Today we have with us a man it's my pleasure to introduce to you, Bill Hicks, who not only is a long-time resident of the Meridian Township area, but also is a man who is greatly instrumental in developing what we have come to know here in mid-Michigan as one of the great shopping centers of this area. Bill, we're going to ask you first, welcome to our program, and then how did you get started in this particular area of Meridian Township?
Well, I was doing real estate work in East Lansing and some here in Okemos, and mostly commercial work in the East Lansing area. We saw some opportunity here and started working here. I was at a shopping center convention in New York and met four fellows from Cleveland, and those four fellows and myself wound up putting together a partnership, and that was the start of Meridian Mall.
Were you born in Michigan or in this area?
Born in the Lansing area.
In the Lansing area? What did your father do?
My father was in the real estate business. My uncle, they were the original Hicks Brothers real estate company, and I went to work with them right out of high school. And my dad wanted to send me to college, and my old aunt in California wanted me to come out there and go to school, but I went right to work instead.
So you've been a lifelong resident then of this whole Lansing metropolitan area, but specifically around the Okemos area for almost 40 years now, as I understand.
That's right. We developed Hiawatha Park when we were still doing residential work, and then we got into other commercial development, did the little strip center on Northwind.
Oh, yes.
And helped put together the original Yankee store development there on Grand River off of Northwind.
And of course, following that then was Meyer and many of the other businesses out in that area.
I was involved in part of the Meyer deal, but I didn't make the main deal.
Let's take a look at Okemos back in those early days of your work in East Lansing and in the Okemos area. Of course, we look at Okemos today, it's a little four corners place. What was it back, say, some 35, 40 years ago?
A pretty quiet spot, pretty quiet. Very little traffic. It was safe to cross the street, and no, it was a friendly little place. Grettenberger had a drugstore and a soda fountain, and
that's where the Tuba Museum is today.
No, that was on the other corner. And there was a hardware store in there where the Tuba Museum is.
Oh, yes.
And it was just a small, very much the small town atmosphere, and no parking problems, no congestion. My early recollection is I don't think there was even a traffic light at Okemos and Hamilton at that time. I know there wasn't. And it's hard to even remember all of it. It's changed so much. But some of the old pictures, I was trying to dig out some pictures at your request, and some of the old pictures you see are almost shocking.
I'm sure they are. Was the Okemos High School, what is now the Education Center, or the offices there in Okemos, was that originally the high school? Do you recall that, Bill?
Yes, that was the high school then, and then we had a terrible time trying to get the new school built. Back in out on Okemos Road there, and we had a group of I guess you call them activists that claimed that we didn't need a school, that didn't need a fancy high school, we didn't need a swimming pool because they had the river, and we nicknamed them the Little Red Schoolhouse Gang, and but a bunch of us hung together and fought like the dickens to get that school built that they're now using, and it's interesting to see how easy that $50 million bond issue went through for a new one.
Boy, I guess.
We couldn't get a few million through many, many years ago without a big fight for it.
Yeah. What became known later on as the Barn Theater right out there in that same area was, I suppose, part of a farmland at that point in time. And as a matter of fact, that probably was all farmland out in there, wasn't it?
That was all open country for the most part, yes. In back of where the high school is today, where Kenowa is today, that was all a farm, and I helped the school board acquire that, and it was interesting at that time. The County Road Commission didn't even want to run a road across there because they said, we don't think there's that much development to justify it. So things change.
Far thinkers. Huh? Bill, explaining what Okemos was like in those days, and of course Hazlitt was even farther behind in its development back then, some 30, 40 years ago, leads to my next question. I presume then that you and the townspeople of the Okemos area, Meridian Township area, looked upon Lansing as their main shopping area then, is that right?
That was the main shopping, and later on Frandor came into being, but that was basically a Sears Roebuck and a strip center, open strip center at that time. It wasn't enclosed. And it was good. It drew a lot of business in there, but the quality shopping was the old Knapp's and Arbaugh's and so on, downtown Lansing. And I can remember we used to go down there for our Christmas shopping, was all of the old stores downtown. And
sure.
There was nothing out here. When we developed Hiawatha Park in 1955, the people loved the area. It was out in the country, and they had very much the country feeling, pheasants running around and the deer running around, but the big complaint was it's so far to the shopping.
Sure.
So that was the turning point when we began to get some shopping out here. Then it made the area much more attractive to people.
I suppose then, east of Coral Gables was again probably almost a desolate area back in those
There was very
days.
little in there, very little.
You were also instrumental in developing the area right across from what we know as the Coral Gables area right now. What's in there now as pistachios and some of the places. You also had a hand in that.
Well, we had the land, and we made a deal on the land, and I helped do the leasing. We put a Yankee store in there, and a Cunningham and a Kroger.
Now, that was pretty big stuff, wasn't it? Cunningham's drugstore in those days?
Cunningham came in. I made a lease with them for a 7,000-foot store, and the merchants in the area said, well, that's terrible. That's unbelievable. Why would anybody put in that big a drugstore? Today, if you talk with Perry Drug or Rite Aid, they want 12,000, 14,000 feet.
Sure. So everything continued to move east then in those days.
That's right.
And then, so far as the people who had to go to Lansing or maybe even Jackson or Detroit to do their major kind of shopping, or Frandor, as you say, that came along in there too, then is when you and your partners and your colleagues began to consider developing something on a much, much larger scale, and that, of course, became Meridian Mall. How did that all come about?
Well, these fellows that I had met at the shopping center convention, they had tied up a tentative deal with Montgomery Ward at that time, and they called me one day and said, Bill, we've got to get together. We want to put something together. We'd like to get 40 acres on the edge of East Lansing. And my reply was, well, you'll be clear out in Okemos. And
Sure.
Their answer was, where the devil is Okemos? But they came up on a cold day in February, and we gave them the tour and went all through it. And as it turned out, we didn't get the Ward's deal, but we got started with J.W. Knapp Company came out and so on, and we went from there. And looking back, I don't know how we did it.
I imagine so.
There were no sewers to the property, no water to the property. We dug a big, almost a Panama Canal type trench along the west side of the property, leading back into to the north there into the Mud Lake drain. That was our storm drain, and the township worked with us beautifully. I met with the planning commission privately one night. I said, this is something that's in the wind. Maybe we can put it here. It's going here or elsewhere in the area, and I think it should be in here. And I remember John Connect. He's been gone for some time now, but John said, Bill, he says, that's going to create a devil of a lot of problems, but he said, we'll work with you. And that was good enough for me. I just wanted to be sure I didn't have somebody really going to fight it or oppose it right from the start. And we had 1,000% cooperation from me and Bob Robinson and some of the old-timers.
Who owned that land prior to that, Bill?
That was in the Grettenberger family, Musselman Grettenberger family. And they also owned where Mountain Jack and that property is today.
Oh, across the Marsh Road from where it is now.
Yeah.
Bill brought along some pictures that we'd like very much to show you. Some may be a little difficult for you to make out, but I'm going to ask Bill to describe them. The very first one, mainly these pictures are in the development of Meridian Mall, and so what we're going to see here will be some pictures in the very early stages of the development and then as construction was continuing on. Bill, this first one, in order to get a perspective of this for our viewers, I think we can see way off to the left now, the little white building just to the right of the telephone pole is what we know as Pilgrim House. Was that what it was then?
That was an old barn that we sold to Tony Coates, furniture dealer.
That's
and
right.
He set his son up in business there, and that was prior to the development of the Myers store right next door. But if you're looking at, as you look across here, here's the
all to the
mall
right.
in here, just the footings going in.
To the right.
And the land has been more or less leveled and cleared. And then there's the Pilgrim House, and right to the right of that would be the Myers site.
Oh, I see.
And then right down in here, you can't quite see it, would be where the Mountain Shack and so on.
Yeah, left of the telephone pole would be Mountain Jack.
Right.
So all of this roadway in front here is Marsh, what we know as Marsh Road.
Well, that would run
today,
right
then.
along here.
Oh, I
This
see.
is the edge of the property where they've graded out.
All right.
But this is the old Hazlitt Oakman's Road, now Marsh Road.
Yes, to the left of the telephone pole.
Right.
All right, now here's a little different perspective, Bill. This one we're seeing after some construction has taken place, obviously, and we're standing, this road right in front of us, is that Grand River?
This is Grand River here, and this is roughly taken from in front of where today, if you're standing here, you'd be in front of the Kmart. Looking
okay.
sort of north
east.
and east towards the mall. And that was the initial mall didn't have the Hudson wing on it or anything of that sort.
All right, so those two white buildings off there to the right are the beginnings
that's
then
the beginning of the mall.
Yeah. All right. So the mall was in there then before we ever had any Kmart or
yes.
any of that west of the mall.
That's right.
All right, now this becomes a little clearer, I think, for people who are familiar with our area. Now we can really see Marsh Road and that Pilgrim House or Coates store up there, that barn. What else have we got in here?
Well, this
now,
in the foreground, this land is actually the point of, you might say it's the front yard of the mall today. We've landscaped that.
Yes.
If you look back across there, you can see the cranes across Grand River that are working on the Myers store.
On the Myers store?
The Myers store there.
All right, yes, that's a little clearer for us to see and understand, and we can see development is coming along.
These are old pictures, they're not the brightest.
Well, that's all right, because we can get a better perspective, I think, of what happened. This one, of course, is just showing some of the structures going up. Was this at the very early stages?
This is the very early stages. Just the first steel was gone up, and some of the wall started there.
What part of the mall did you start on first, Bill? Do you remember? Was it Knapp's?
Well, no, the mall originally was a sort of a cross with a wing out each way, but the very short wing towards Grand River, and a short wing there. Mainly, it was an east and west configuration with a center court.
And this picture then shows the development a little farther on.
That's right.
Who's that gentleman standing right there?
That's one of the partners, Roger Benjamin. Yes.
And it shows still going on, nothing further developed than what we see right there at that point when the picture was taken. Is that right?
We had, at that point, though, we had nailed down the Knapp's store, and we had the old G.C. Murphy store. It was one of our big deals at that time, 50,000-foot store and a credit tenant. And that wasn't much of a store by today's standards, but we were tickled to have it.
Sure.
And we had Wilco down on the other end. That was a 100,000-foot store there. That was a big store in those days.
Now, what years are we talking about here, Bill?
We started planning, first meeting we had to plan this was in February of 1966. And we actually opened the mall in early November of '69. So we said it was 3 years and 9 months to the day, and we said that was a long pregnancy.
A long pregnancy. But then it opened, and of course it's been expanded since that time.
Oh, it expanded a number of times, and the
sure.
biggest expansion, of course, was when we added the Hudson wing, and then later we added Merwin's. And,
big success.
We're up to about 900,000 feet now. The original mall, I believe, was 325,000 or 345,000 feet. So.
And now you're up to 900,000 square feet.
Plus the outlots.
Been a great success right from the beginning, Bill?
We're 98% leased today, so
really?
I guess it's successful.
I guess that's successful. All right. Bill, let's move a little farther north now. you never lived in Hazlitt per se, but you certainly are familiar with the area around there. Hazlitt really came along in development somewhat after Okemos, didn't it?
Quite a long while after that, yes. There was a lot of housing went in out there, many, many years ago. Cushwa and Miller built in there, Lakeview Heights and so on, and some of those areas. Mid-level housing, and very much sort of a development project, you say. Project housing is what I call it.
Not much of a shopping area there.
Nothing at all to speak of, and very little. And it was kind of overlooked. Well, then the mall came in, and the development started around Okemos there, and eventually Schmitz came in, and it discouraged anybody from going over. That's kind of in the backyard in a sense. And it was a good area, and it had a lot of potential, but there was opportunity here in Okemos, and people wouldn't go over there. They just seemed to think that this was the more prime of the areas. And but it's developed well since then. There's some shopping over there, good shopping. And
well, I would say then that Meridian Mall certainly was a factor in getting the people then to go beyond that Okemos area and move farther north and east. One of the big attractions, of course, for years and years was Lake Lansing itself, wasn't it?
Right.
And we have the place called the Dells, which I remember even my parents talking, and my parents didn't live in this area, but they talked about coming to the Dells.
When I was in high school, that was a big deal, to go out there on a Friday night. It was a very decent place, very nice place, not a rough and tumble joint. It wasn't any kind of a dive. It saw some tougher days after that,
sure
but
did.
At one time that was a very, very nice place to go, and right on the lake, and very pleasant.
That's where the condominiums are right now, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah.
I understand that that also there was a kind of a dance floor that actually extended out over the water or into the water. Do you remember anything about that? Or
I think there was an open area came out towards the lake. I don't think it went out over the water.
Okay. But they were big bands that were drawn to that place, weren't there? Right. I mean, we're talking about Tommy Dorsey and Artie Shaw.
Some big names.
Some big name bands. From what I understand, in the very early days, that still was a park area around there where the Dells were, and people actually took boats, I guess, from the south end of Lake Lansing and would take boat trips on up to the north end and up to where the Dells were. You familiar with any of that?
I don't remember that. I can remember my dad on a hot day driving my brother and I out and letting us jump in the lake there and swim, and that was a big treat.
Was that swimming area still where it is today, Bill, right by the park?
They had a swimming area there, and you could change in the bathhouse, and it cost you a nickel.
Much development around the lake in those days?
No, there was a lot of small houses and some pretty shabby houses, a lot of them. And I remember when I was on the volunteer fire department for a while, and some of the worst fires we had were out around the lake.
Really?
Big houses, you know, they were built so close together, and they'd get going. The only water supply we had was in the lake.
Well, there was enough of that then, wasn't it? Because I imagine the lake itself was much clearer and cleaner than what it is today, of course, with all of our development going on.
Well, no, I think the lake is cleaned up from what it was.
Yes, well, it certainly is.
They got the sewers in and got rid of the septic systems around the lake.
That's right.
They're much more conscious of what they're doing to the lake now.
Yeah. Did trains play a larger part in transportation for the people in this area back 30, 40, 50 years ago than they do now? You know, if we want to take a trip to Port Huron or Canada or someplace like that, or someplace west, we have to go down into East Lansing. Were there any depots around this area? Did Okemos or
I don't think Okemos had a passenger depot.
So
old
downtown
Grand Trunk
Lansing,
in downtown
then.
Lansing. Many times I can remember my wife and I, our family, went to Chicago for a weekend. We'd get on the train and go down and back, and I used to occasionally take they had an old streamliner, they called it, ran out of the C&O station there on Michigan Avenue, and we used to take that into downtown Detroit. It was quicker than driving it.
Was it really?
They'd make the run down there in just over an hour, and we thought that was fantastic.
What about the entertainment? You know, we have pictures, we have museums, we have theater that we can attend now. I'm not looking back 90 years or anything, but still, even back 40 or 50 years, many of these places that we have now for our entertainment didn't exist at that time.
Right.
What about in your time, Bill? What kind of entertainment did you have? Was there full family entertainment?
Family entertainment. There was always a lot going on at the old Michigan State College, it seemed. They had programs and Saturday night movies and travel features and that sort of thing. And I don't know, there seemed to be lots going on always.
I guess so.
A little bit of a theater in East Lansing, the old State Theater.
Yes, yes.
And then Lansing had 4 or 5. I lived in East Lansing, right near the downtown business district, and we could get on the streetcar for a nickel to go downtown, and it cost a dime to get in the movie, and a nickel to ride home, and that was a big evening.
So that was, those were the days that those the streetcar tracks that we've seen pictures of in the past. Anytime we look at East Lansing, we see those streetcar tracks going right down the center of East Lansing, don't we?
Right.
How long ago did they remove those? Do you recall? If you rode the streetcar, you must have a general idea
I think
when
those tracks were. I think they ended that activity. I think they ended the service just before the war, I believe. That's my recollection. I think they were gone after the war anyway. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Dick, I can't remember what I had for breakfast.
Well, you're doing very well remembering on many of these things that I'm bringing up to your attention, and I know that I didn't have much time to spend with you beforehand to give you an idea, but I just said we're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about what things were like back when you were here in the very beginnings of 30 and 40 and maybe even 50 years ago. You said that you were born and raised in Michigan, in the Lansing area too, as I understand.
Born in Lansing, raised in East Lansing.
Went to East Lansing High School.
Right.
Go to Michigan State.
No, I didn't go to State.
Didn't go to State.
I went to work.
You went to work instead.
And I had an old maid aunt out in California, wanted me to come out there, and
Yes.
she was quite a well-to-do old lady, and she wanted me to come out there and go to school. Any college I wanted to go to, any university, and just begged me to go. But I didn't care for school that much, and I went to work, and then the next thing I knew, I was in the Army. So.
Sure. But you were following in your father's footsteps, though, as you said.
I started right in with my dad and my uncle.
We certainly have our problems today in all of our communities. Can you recall what some of the problems may have been back then that you had to contend with in terms of your community and its developments and society itself? You know, we didn't have such problems as we're facing today, obviously, in drugs and all of that kind of thing. But
I didn't hear much of anything like that.
Sure.
In those days. When I first moved into Meridian, and that was in '56, people that moved out here, and we were selling lots, and the homes were going up there in Hiawatha Park, and some of those people, their big concern was fire protection. We had a volunteer department, and for what equipment we had, we thought we were a pretty good outfit, but it was pretty barren, and there was, of course, no water supply anywhere. We had all the water came on tank trucks, and police protection was just absolutely minimal. There was one car, a deputy sheriff out part of the time, and that was about it. And there's very little coverage. With the sheriff's department covered out of Mason, and state police would come in on a bad accident or something, but that was a big concern. There was no ambulance service out here other than if you needed an ambulance, you called one of the funeral homes in Lansing, and they would send one out. And the firemen got together and purchased an old Cadillac ambulance. It was the first ambulance we had out here then. Bought an old used one and fixed it all up for a rescue unit and an ambulance unit. And
where was the fire department located then?
over at Hazlitt and Okemos Road.
The same place the fire department is.
Yes, and then
today?
later they built a station. Oh, I don't know. I think it was about 1956 they built the Okemos station. That was a big change there. We got more equipment and better equipment and moved ahead pretty good. But some thin days. Those days the fire department didn't have radios in their trucks. And I can remember we'd go out of the Hazlitt, what we called the Hazlitt station, go out by the lake for a grass fire, and we'd stop at a corner gas station and call in to see if they had another fire for us, because they'd pop one right after the other, and we'd phone back, say, where do you want us next? And the days of radio were a big blessing, a great blessing.
Sure. Then you filled your tanks out at Lake Lansing, did you?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
There was a limited hydrant system in some areas, and we'd pick up water there, but it was nip and tuck.
Bill, in your remembrance of downtown East Lansing, and then what we refer to as downtown Okemos and downtown Hazlitt, but primarily in the East Lansing area, were there any larger buildings, multi-floored buildings that you recall back 40 years ago or maybe even 50 years ago that since have been torn down and replaced?
I don't.
Can you think of any at all?
I can't think of anything nothing in Okemos, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the old Grettenberger drugstore building was on the corner there of Okemos and Hamilton. That's still standing. That's I think probably one of the oldest buildings in the area. East Lansing, no, there's nothing in there besides the only old buildings in that area that were torn down were some of the old college buildings.
Mm-hmm. Bill, as we're wrapping up our interview today, what do you see in all of these years of your living and working in the Meridian Township area as the greatest developments in terms of your work itself, in realty, in the progress that has been attained? What do you see has happened more than ever, has been the greatest happening to this area, for all of the people in this area in terms of development?
Well, it's a change. It's a total change from what we had, of course, and a lot of people resent the growth and don't want this growth. We built good schools out here, and that attracted people. We got shopping that was better than downtown Lansing had. That attracted people. That has added traffic and congestion. There's no question about it. But the other side of the coin is you've got paramedic service at your door today, ambulance service, top-notch fire service, good police service. You've got a lot of amenities for good living that we didn't have, and maybe people think that's a step backwards. I think it's kind of a nice feeling to be able to punch 911 and have a fire truck there if you need it. And that's one thing that they say, well, this is terrible, all this development. It's interesting to me that some of the people that object the most are the ones that moved in, and they don't want anybody else to move in. You know, that's like the fisherman gets his boat on the lake. Don't launch any more boats, I'm out here. And you can't do that. You can't stop it. The best thing you can do is try and be responsible and control it. I've had my bouts with the Planning Commission and the Township Board, and I've always told them, I'm proud of my tracks in Meridian Township. And one night I challenged the board. I said, if you had the right to do it, what would you tear down that I've built? And I didn't get any answers on that. I've been involved. I've helped create some of the development. I've been fortunate to have been in on what I've been involved with. But I make no apologies. I think it's been good overall for the community. We've been able to afford better schools, better fire protection, better public services than we've ever had before. We have public water in our subdivisions. We have public sewers that we didn't have, and that sort of thing.
So really what you're saying then, Bill, I guess, what you're saying is the quality of life really has improved in the past 30, 40, 50 years to such an extent that even some of the people who were here involved in the improvement of this and didn't believe that it was improving have to admit now that indeed the quality of life has improved.
I think it has. I think the commercial development has brought us traffic and congestion and all of that, but on the other hand, it's poured hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into the school systems and into the fire departments, the police departments, and a better way of life in a sense.
Well, it sounds to me, Bill, that you're a very happy man in the part that you have played in the development of all of these places you've talked of today in Meridian Township and even in East Lansing, of course, starting in your early days as a realtor. And I think, well, you might be proud of yourself because I think the people of this area ought to be very proud of you, too. And I don't think you're saying this is the end. I think you're looking ahead, too. Is that right?
Not too much. I'm going fishing. But I've had a good time. I've had a lot of fun. I've had a good time, and it's been interesting. I've enjoyed what I've done.
Well, Bill, I'm sure that you have enjoyed it, and we've enjoyed spending this 30 minutes with you. I'd like to thank you very much for being here with us. We've been speaking for the last half hour with Bill Hicks, who not only is one of the early residents of Meridian Township, but instrumental in one of the fantastic developments in shopping, and that was the Meridian Mall, of which he and all of us are mostly proud. Again, we thank Bill Hicks for being our guest today.
I don't know about you, but I thought those pictures were incredible, looking back at the area prior to Meridian Mall and Meyer being here. I want to thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Throwback Thursday.